rather boring week of college football was capped off by a very entertaining Colorado and Colorado State game that I did not stay up to watch, but later saw the highlights of. But seriously, outside of that game, there was not a whole lot of good football played this week. However, this upcoming week is the week that we're going to find the fuck out about just about everybody. Hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I'm your host, as always, Nathan, and today we are going to be recapping the third week of college football. To start this off, I'm going to go ahead and run through all of the teams that struggled, that were previously ranked in the top 10. There was a lot of them. There's 6 of them. 6 of the 9 teams in the top 10 that we're playing this week struggled. We'll start off with Georgia, which I think is the most excusable out of all of the teams that struggled. I think South Carolina is a decent football team. I think they're the best team that anybody on the screen right now played this past week, with a potential top 10 pick at the quarterback position. So them struggling and then coming out in the second half and kind of figuring shit out and running off 21 straight points, that's not as concerning as it would be for a different team for me, because I felt like I already knew what Georgia was this year, which was a very beatable team if you can score probably somewhere around 28 points. I think Georgia's offense is very suspect. I think they are going to be able to run the ball, but I'm not sure they'll be able to do it consistently. I think their offensive line has taken a step back. That doesn't mean that they aren't very, very good or maybe even elite, but they are not the same caliber that they were the past 2 years, or at least they haven't shown to me that they are the same caliber of offensive line as the past 2 years. You could say the same thing about Michigan, who we'll get to in a minute, but Georgia's offense, to me, is what is going to keep them from three-peating. I think they're still very likely to make the playoffs. I don't think 12-1 gets them in the playoffs. They didn't play anybody outside of the conference schedule. I don't think 12-1 gets them in the playoffs, especially the way that the SEC has looked this year. So I think they have to go 13-0. Luckily for them, I think they do. I mean, if they play Alabama in the SEC championship game or LSU, which is very likely, those are the two teams that are likely going to come out of the SEC West, then I can see them losing those games, even though I do think that they would be favored and probably should win both of them, because their defense is still a top 5 defense in all of college football. I don't think that's pretty much going to change for the next 4 or 5 years. I think we're looking at like what Alabama was from 2009 until 2015, where if they didn't win the national title, you were deeply surprised. I think that's what we're looking at with Georgia right now. Michigan, on the other hand, I am a bit more concerned. Basically, the running game couldn't get going the first 2 games. This week they had that going a little bit more successfully against the worst team they've played so far in Bowling Green. But J.J. McCarthy decided to absolutely shit the bed. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into this because J.J. McCarthy will be the subject of the film review on Wednesday, but wow, he played bad. And like inexcusably bad. His 3 interceptions, all 3 of them were not passes that should have been thrown, and he should have thrown a 4th and maybe even 5th interception in that game. That was easily the worst game he's ever played as a quarterback, at least at the college level. Now, I guess as a Michigan fan, I should be happy that it happened against Bowling Green, but now my confidence in J.J. McCarthy as a quarterback has been thoroughly shaken. I still think he's a good quarterback. I still think he's in the conversation for QB3 on the 2024 NFL Draft. But I also have sort of taken him out of the conversation for the Heisman. I don't particularly think there's a whole lot he can do in order to get back into that conversation. His only real chance was to be like a Stetson Bennett type of like Heisman finalist sort of situation. But then again, the Big Ten doesn't vote like the SEC for the Heisman Trophy. The SEC would vote for anybody as long as they're in the South before they will vote for fucking a single player who doesn't live in the South. There was not a deserving player in the SEC that deserved to be at that Heisman Trophy ceremony last year, but somehow Stetson Bennett ended up being there. Easily the worst Heisman finalist, I think, since, oh God, I don't even know when. I'll just say for the past 10 years and call it safe. But A little bit of a tangent there. Back to Michigan. I think the defense is okay. Their inability to rush the passer, once again, is very concerning. And I don't want to hear shit about the past 2 weeks, okay? You were playing teams that you were physically bigger and more athletic than. Week 1, you didn't play a team that you were physically more talented and far more athletic than. ECU had a Power 5 type of size on their offensive line, and you didn't do jack diddly. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do it in the future, but right now, the pass rush is a concern, and a big concern. I'm not as concerned about the secondary as I maybe should be. I think a large part of that is they know they're playing teams that they're going to win even if they play their absolute worst, which is exactly what happened this past week against Bowling Green. So they're kind of just throwing people out there. I think Rod Moore could have played maybe last week, but certainly this week if this had been a game that actually mattered. And Bakari Page came back this week. So I think the secondary will get better when they can start playing all of their players. We're going to find out a little bit about this Michigan team when they play Rutgers next week. For whatever reason, Rutgers always plays Michigan tough, or at least they have under Greg Schiano. So we might find out some shit about Michigan this week. I fully expect them to come out motivated to play. After the way that they played last week, I think they're probably going to win the game by 2 or 3 touchdowns. But Rutgers is a quality football team. I think they're a bowl caliber football team in the Power 5, which means that they're okay. Like, they're not world beaters, but I don't think they're the worst team in the Big Ten. I don't even think they're, maybe not even bottom 4. I think they're clearly better than Northwestern. I think they're clearly better than Illinois. I think they're probably better than Indiana. And I think you can put them in that same sort of bottom of the teams that have a chance to make a bowl game with like Purdue and Michigan State. Like, I think those would both probably be 50-50 games. So I'll put one of them below Rutgers and one of them above Rutgers. So I'll say that they aren't a bottom 4 team in the Big Ten. So when they play Michigan this week, we're going to see something out of Michigan, I think. And then finally be able to rate them properly. Because when we get to the top 25 later on in the video, I don't particularly have a reason to justify where I put them, especially given what they've put out on the field so far this year. But I also can't really justify moving them anywhere. We just don't know anything about Michigan right now. And next week, we're at least going to have something to latch onto and say, yes, that's real. So that's going to be important for Michigan. Moving on to number 3, Texas. They struggled quite a bit. Turned it on in the fourth quarter, though. And my problem with Texas so far, they got moved up from 4 to 3 this past week. I don't really know why. But Quinn Ewers didn't look great. And at this point, I kind of expect him to dominate competition like Wyoming. Now, it might just be that Texas is a team that can't turn it on offensively until the fourth quarter, because we've seen that in all 3 of their games so far. Week 1, struggled in the first half. It was a close game. Everyone's just like, oh man, how are they going to fare against Alabama? And then they turned it on in the fourth quarter, and they were like, oh, okay, they kind of figured it out. Then you go into Alabama, and it's the same sort of story. The offense is sluggish, and like they have a couple of plays here or there, but they're not operating at their peak like you're hoping they would until the fourth quarter. And then now this past week, it's the same story. So that might just be what Texas is this year. They might just be a team that can't play offense until the fourth quarter. That being said, of all of the teams in the top 10, I think Texas has the easiest path to making the playoffs. I would be astonished if Texas did not make the playoffs. I think, like, maybe they can lose to Oklahoma in a rivalry game. You know, you never know what happens in those things. But then they're probably going to play Oklahoma again in the Big 12 championship game, which means that I think Texas would then win that game, because that's just typically how they end up going. If you win the regular season matchup, you lose the postseason matchup. So I think Texas has a really, really good chance to make the playoffs. Florida State at 4 in the AP poll. They, I think, maybe got caught looking ahead a little bit. They do play Clemson this week. I get that it's not the game that we thought it was going to be early on in the year, but still, Clemson is a very, very talented team that can play defense. So don't be surprised if Clemson ends up playing that game close. I don't think they're going to win. I think Florida State is far too talented for them to lose that game, at least to that team. I think potentially in an ACC championship game, they could lose to North Carolina just because North Carolina can put points on the board with anybody. But I don't particularly think that's very likely. I think Florida State might have the second easiest, or maybe you could even argue the easiest path to making the playoffs as well. So I think we genuinely have maybe 2 or 3 locks to make the playoffs unless something catastrophic happens already. Like, we know the Big Ten champion is getting in. We know probably an undefeated SEC team gets in, and if a one-loss Pac-12 team is probably going to get in over a one-loss SEC team. So it has to be an undefeated SEC team in order to make the playoffs, in my opinion, and that's pretty much just Georgia. Like, I'm not sure a 12-1 Alabama who beats LSU in a convincing fashion and then beats the brakes off of Georgia in the SEC championship game makes the playoffs over like a 12-1 Washington whose only loss is to like an 11-1 USC or something weird like that. Or flip that scenarios with whoever you want to put in, 12-1 Oregon or a 12-1 USC, and maybe their only loss is to Notre Dame out of conference. And then Notre Dame is a whole goddamn wild card in all of this, because if they go 12-0, they're a lock to make the playoffs too, because then they would have beaten Ohio State, who damn well might win the Big Ten, and USC, who damn well might win the Pac-12. And those games don't mean anything for them winning those championships because they're out of conference. So this year in college football is appearing to be what I thought it was going to be. You can go back and look at my old videos. I said multiple times in multiple videos that this year was going to be what 2013 was to the 4-team playoff, but to the 12-team playoff. Like, this year, I think you can make a convincing argument that there could be literally 12 teams that could win the national title. I think you can make that argument this year. Just like in 2013, the year before the 4-team playoff was implemented, you could literally make the argument that any of those 4 teams ranked in the top 4 could have won the national title. Like, 2013 was the best case scenario for a 4-team playoff, and I think this year, 2023, is going to be the best case scenario for a 12-team playoff, meaning that we will never see a 12-team playoff that is actually worthy of being a 12-team playoff. Real quickly to finish off this segment, Penn State, they probably struggled the least out of anybody on this list, in my opinion. Illinois is a team that plays really, really good defense. Bielema is a great head coach. I think he's going to turn Illinois into a consistent program that consistently puts defensive talent into the NFL. Not as concerned about Penn State as other people are. There are people on Twitter talking shit about Drew Allar, and I'm like, chill. He's the best quarterback in the Big Ten this year. Alabama struggling with USF. That's what happens when you start Tyler Buchner. Tyler Buchner is the worst starting quarterback in the Power 5. I do not think he's going to start again. If you go back to Jalen Milroe, then you actually have a chance to maybe win the SEC. If you don't go back to Jalen Milroe, you're going to lose 2 or 3 more games. And if I'm Hugh Freeze, I am licking my chops at this team because I'm like, okay, cool. All I have to do is motivate my players to go and beat Alabama, which is going to be a very easy thing to do because the Iron Bowl is arguably the hottest rivalry in all of college football. And then all of a sudden, I just have to score like 24 points, and I'm right there in the football game. So Alabama might be having the down year that everybody kind of thought they might have if they couldn't get the quarterback situation played out, because the offensive line doesn't look great and the defense is not as dominant as I think we were expecting it to be. There were only really 2 big-time upsets in college football this week, to me at least, and that was Tennessee losing to Florida and Kansas State losing to Missouri. You could make the argument that both of these wins were program-building wins for each of their respective head coaches, Billy Napier and Elia Drinkwitz. But I don't think Missouri is all that good. I think they have a decent chance to get to like 8 or 9 wins, but I don't particularly think they're really going to compete for anything in the SEC. But I do think Florida has the talent, maybe not at quarterback, but just about everywhere else, in order to actually compete for something. So, Florida, especially with the way that they're recruiting now under Billy Napier, I think they have a chance to actually get something rolling here. To me, 9 or 10 wins for Florida this year would mean, okay, we're ready to explode onto the national scene next year. Now, that being said, I don't trust Billy Napier to actually do that. But beating Tennessee this week, who I think is a quality football team that probably should end up with 9 or 10 wins by the end of the year, does give me some confidence in his ability to actually become a quality head coach at the University of Florida. Of all the teams in the top 10 this past week, I think there was only one that thoroughly impressed me. I don't think Ohio State impressed me at all. Well, I mean, I know Ohio State didn't impress me at all, but I don't think Ohio State was impressive at all. Hanging 63 on Western Kentucky when you're running one-man routes with max protection and taking deep shots to Marvin Harrison Jr., who's just flat out better than everybody on the Western Kentucky defense. Quadruple team him, it doesn't matter, he's still going to be wide open. That's not very impressive. I still have serious concerns about Ohio State as a football team this year. The only team in the top 10 that I am absolutely convinced is a high-quality football team after this week is Washington. I said last week that they were the best team in the pack, and I am more convinced of that statement this week than I am last week. However, Oregon did look good, and I think they might end up being the second best team in the pack because I am just absolutely not sold on USC at all. But Washington, on the other hand, I think has shown the ability to play at least average defense. Now, Michigan State is dealing with a lot of shit, but I don't think that the offense is as dysfunctional as it looked this past week. I think Michigan State, once they get further and further away from this Mel Tucker stuff, which I am not going to comment on, I think they'll probably get their shit together a little bit and maybe even make a bowl game. But getting obliterated by Washington is not a good look. But again, I think they were somewhat distracted. Washington is for real. I think Michael Penix, at this point in the year, gun to my head, pick somebody who's going to win the Heisman. I'm picking Michael Penix. I don't think Shader Sanders, when Colorado ends up losing a game or two, I don't think he's really going to be in the conversation anymore. Travis Hunter has unfortunately gotten hurt, so I think we can pretty much eliminate him from that conversation as well. J.J. McCarthy fell off. Quinn Ewers is not in the conversation at all. It's pretty much right now Michael Penix, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Bo Nix. And I think that's really just about it in terms of legitimately competing for the Heisman Trophy at this point in the season right now. Somebody could turn it on and change that. It's very possible. But I think Michael Penix should be universally looked at as the Heisman favorite. And Washington, I also think, should pretty universally be looked at as the favorite in the Pac-12, just because I don't understand how USC is ranked at 5. It's just preseason hype. That is not the 5th best team in the country. I'm not even sure they should really be in the top 15, but I have them in my top 15, in my top 25. But man, that defense is just bad, and I don't think it's ever going to get better. I just think Lincoln Riley is so good on offense and puts his defenses in such bad situations that even if they have all the talent and even if they are well coached, they're never going to be anything better than bad. And Washington, for whatever reason, they have the elite offense, but they also have a defense that plays really well. I think their defense legitimately can be average to maybe even above average or good, to go along with maybe the best receiving core in the country, a offensive line that has thoroughly exceeded even my expectations. Like, I thought they were going to be good. They look elite so far this season, and a surprising running game to go along with Michael Penix, who has taken that step forward. And right now, if you told me he was QB3 and went with the 3rd overall pick of the draft, I would believe you, because he's got the physical talent, he's got a cannon of an arm, and he's putting up numbers for Washington this year. So I think Washington is the best team in the Pac-12. I think they're probably going to win the Pac-12, and I am in love with this team. Basically, they're probably my second favorite team in all of college football this year. The AP Top 25 has some seriously weird rankings this week. Like, USC at 5 is absurd anyway, but flipping Texas and Florida State when they both struggled, I don't know about that. I think Florida State's win right now is better than Texas's win, which, according to the rankings, is actually factual. And Florida State won in a much more convincing manner than Texas did. Texas won in a convincing manner, but FSU dominated. I think the only reason that Florida State is ranked below Texas in this ranking is because Florida State's win happened week 1 and Texas's happened week 2. I think it's somewhat a recency bias. Outside of that, the top 10 literally didn't change until we get to number 10. Oregon jumps up over Utah and LSU and ends up at 10. Then we get Utah 11, LSU 12, Bama falling all the way down to 13, Oregon State moving up to 14, Ole Miss moving up to 15, Oklahoma up 3 spots to 16, North Carolina up 3 spots to 17, Duke up 3 spots to 18, Colorado down 1, Miami, Wazoo, UCLA all up 2. We get Tennessee falling all the way to 23, Iowa up to 1, and Florida ranked from being unranked this past week. All in all, I don't really have a whole lot of problems with the way that this stuff is ranked. It's not what I would have done. We'll get to what I would have done in a moment. But all of this makes sense based off of what the AP poll was last week and all of the movement and everything. So we do get a top 15 matchup now with Ole Miss and Alabama this week, which is kind of funny to think about, because I think the only reason they ranked Ole Miss at 15 ahead of Oklahoma was so that they could market Alabama-Ole Miss as a top 15 matchup. But, you know, it's whatever. I'm not really all that concerned about it. They do shit like this all the time. I mean, I think it was last year, right, where Notre Dame was ranked preseason number 5, and the only reason that you could ever possibly justify that Notre Dame team being ranked in the top 5 was because they were playing number 2 Ohio State, and they wanted to market that game as a top 5 matchup in the opening week of college football. My rankings, on the other hand, I think make a little bit more sense, but then again, I made them, so of course I think they make more sense than the AP rankings. Top 4 is unchanged. Potentially could have seen some movement if, like, Florida State or Texas had blown out their teams in a convincing manner, but that didn't happen, so I'm keeping everybody the same there. This week we're going to learn some shit about most of these teams, so next week there could potentially be some movement in the top 4, but for right now I'm keeping it 1 Georgia, 2 Michigan, 3 Florida State, 4 Texas. Washington jumps Ohio State and Penn State for me and ends up at 5 after their dominant win over Michigan State. Ohio State falls down 1, Penn State falls down 1 just because I moved Washington up. They both hit for par this week, but unfortunately Washington exceeded my expectations, so I got them jumping them. Notre Dame goes up 1 spot because Alabama lost and I had them ranked 8 last week. Oregon State jumps up ahead of USC to me. I do think that they are probably a better all-around team than USC right now. I've got USC at 10, LSU at 11, North Carolina at 12, moving up 6 spots for me. Oklahoma at 13, moving up 4 spots. I've got Bama down to 14. I've got Oregon State and Utah staying put at 15 and 16. I've got Duke up 3 spots to 17. I've got Colorado up 1 spot to 18. I'm not going to blame them for playing in a rivalry game in a close game. I still think they're a quality team that can maybe pull off an upset or 2 this year. We've got Wazoo at 19. I've got Miami at 20. I've got Iowa at 21. I've got Tennessee still ranked at 22. That was pretty difficult for me, but when you get down to this area, I'm just not sure there's a whole lot of teams that deserve to be ranked. I've got Florida at 23, I've got UCLA at 24, and Arkansas at 25. Neither of those 2 teams moved for me. And unfortunately, that is all that I have for you today. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree with me at any point in the video, or if you just have something to say, go ahead and leave a comment down in the comment section below. Just let's keep it civil, because after all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. I'll see you next time.